If there is something that makes the ancient Egyptians stand out from other Mediterranean civilizations, is the way they chose to preserve their bodies after death, especially their kings and noblemen. Mummies have always fascinated us and evoked stories of mystery and horror. However, for the ancient Egyptians, it was much more than that. The first mummies were naturally produced. Egyptians buried their dead in a pit and noticed that after a certain time the hot sun would absorb the body's fluids, desiccating it. The desert preserved the body, giving it a dark, hard shell. The word mummy comes from the medieval Latin mumia, a borrowing from the Arabic word mumia, which means bitumen. They received this name because of the dark-colored skin of the unwrapped remains. People thought that the embalming process included asphalt and tar, both forms of bitumen. This natural phenomenon was later ritualized and hinted that, since the body could survive death, so could the spirit. The Egyptians were not obsessed about death. They were really trying to overcome it and live forever. The notion of the afterlife and what happens after death varied over time. Kings, for example, were thought to live among gods, the sun and the stars. Later on, they thought they could live forever in the presence of the god Osiris in the field of reeds, where they would be reunited with their family. However, they were also expected to work there. To enter this sort of paradise, the heart was judged by the good deeds on earth. The science and theology of embalming evolved over the years, so there is no single Egyptian ritual. But the scholars believe that the mummification process started as follows. Egyptologists have determined that the mummification rituals were performed in the so-called Red Land, a dry region far off from populated areas with easy access to the Nile River. Embalmers may have worked in open areas that favored proper ventilation. The body was then taken to the Ibu, the place of purification. Here they cleaned the body with palm wine and washed it in water from the river Nile. This represented a sort of rebirth, as the person passed from one world into the next. Egyptians discovered that decomposition worked largely from the inside out. Bacteria collected first in the body's internal organs and moved on from there. To stop the putrefaction process, the embalmers realized they would need to remove all the organs. They would make a cut on the left side of the body to remove the liver, the lungs, the stomach, and the intestines. They would let them dry and put them into containers called canopic jars. The heart, however, was not taken out, since Egyptians thought it was the organ that would house our intelligence, feelings, and soul. The brain was not considered important, so it was not preserved. A long hook was introduced into the nose until it could reach the brain, to squish it and pull it from the nostrils. Over many years, the embalmers' practices changed, and embalmers began to return internal organs to the bodies after they had been dried in natron. However, solid wood or stone canopic jars were still buried with the mummy to symbolically protect the internal organs. Then the body was covered in natron, a salt that would naturally dehydrate the body, which was collected from local riverbeds. Unlike the hot sand that dried the earliest Egyptian mummies, natron absorbed moisture without severely darkening and hardening the skin. The body was left in natron for weeks. After that, it was brought to a place named the House of Purification. The embalmers removed the stuffing from the body cavities and refilled it with natron. resin-soaked linen, and various other materials. The embalming recipe was a very well-kept secret until a recent study revealed that sesame oil, a balsam, a gum extracted from acacia, and a conifer tree resin were used due to their antibacterial properties, which would prevent the body from rotting away. The body was then wrapped in bandages, first the hands and feet, wrapping fingers and toes individually, then head, arm, legs and torso. Without this binding system, the fragile, desiccated mummies would fall apart. Amulets for good luck and protection in the afterlife were included among the wrappings. In order for the bandages to contain the mummy effectively, they had to be wound tightly. Once all the parts of the body were wrapped, the embalmers began wrapping the body as a whole. During this entire process, they uttered spells and laid protective amulets on the body, for protection in the next world, wrapping them up in different layers. After the mummy was fully wrapped, the embalmers put a mask to the head. This new face, which was a representation of the dead person, played an important role in the passage to the afterlife. It helped the spirit of the deceased to identify the correct body. The mummy was then placed in a coffin decorated to look like a person. At the tomb, the priest, dressed as the god Anubis, performed the ceremony of the mouth, a ritual in which the deceased gained the powers of speech, sight, touch, hearing, and taste for the next world. Finally, the coffin was placed inside a large sarcophagus, which would rest in a tomb, together with furniture, clothing, food, and drinks that the deceased would need in the afterlife. Animals were mummified too. Ancient Egyptians had a very close relationship with nature and understood the importance of animals in their everyday life. They helped to farm the fields, provided food, and embodied concepts of danger, strength, and fertility, usually associated with gods. Cats, in particular, were highly regarded as pets, and not only for the company they offered, but because they kept granaries and houses free from rats and snakes. However, their mummification process was much simpler. They were dried, filled with sand, and wrapped up in decorative patterns.